Today is November 7th, 2013. I want to welcome everyone who has taken time out of your lives to join in and tune in for the 4 reasons we are afraid of change. I have a feeling you're going to get more than 4 takeaways today, but you'll at least get those 4, and you'll be able to customize it to you and hopefully learn a little something about yourself. My name is Jess Toddfeld. I run a communications training company, mainly media training and presentation training out of New York, and of course we're all around the country and work with folks in other parts of the world. And I get to introduce all of you to interesting people who are in my world, in the training and development world. And that brings us to who is helping you and leading you and showing you a few interesting things today, and that is David Harder. Give you a little bit of a background on David. David, in 1990, David Harder founded Inspired Work, his company, using a revolutionary 2-day group program as its foundation. Inspired Work is based on a model that work is the biggest relationship that we have. And some of you might have noticed my subject line, which was basically to that point, your relationship with work. So that brought a few people here. The 2-day program is used to help people evaluate what they want to do with their lives, what they've grown into professionally, and it gives people the impetus to transform that great big relationship. In 1998, David wrote his first book, The Truth About Work. Much of what we will be covering today is introduced in that book, so you can get a lot of good stuff today. David is writing 2 books for publication today. One is called Certain Engagement, and it covers all that he's learned in the employee engagement field. In 2001, the Walt Disney Company asked David to evaluate their leadership curriculum. His pointed comments led to designing Inspired Leadership, and as I'm saying this, I'm thinking, hopefully I'll get David, well, I'll force him into it, to explain a few interesting things that have been happening with his company, and where he continues to keep things being innovative. But it led to designing Inspired Leadership, which has led Disney's most popular learning program for a number of years. Today, Dave is deeply involved in employee engagement, working with organizations as wide-ranging as HBO, USC, and, of course, Disney, as we just said. I've worked with David over the past 5 years. He's a terrific guy. I said to him, look, we have to do something. I want you to open you up to a lot of the people who have somehow made their way onto my various lists, and we have some good stuff and very valuable stuff to discuss. So there's the big lead-in. David, welcome to the telecall today.
Thank you, Jess, and thank you to everybody for joining us today. I'm going to be covering, taking you through a chart that we sent you. As you may notice, it's blank at this point, and by the time we're about halfway through this conversation, it's going to be filled. I really wanted you to experience how this is all knit together as we're in this conversation. So I'm going to be taking you through that chart. As we're about halfway through the conversation, I'm going to start asking for questions so that we are really clear that everybody understands the overview of this whole thing. And then we're going to go into a conversation of how can we implement skills to help people get through these changes within our organization and also within ourselves.
Just as you're saying that, David, I just want to say, if anybody's thinking, where is this handout? If you got an email shortly before the call, there was a link in there. If not, if you go back to one of the emails that led you to this call, if you can't find it and you just sign up again, you'll see it's on that sign-up page when you give your information. But hopefully you have it, and you have it out in front of you.
Good.
Go ahead, David, take it away, as you were saying.
What we're going to do at the conclusion of this, all of you will receive an 8-page handout with in-depth information for using this within your business. So a little bit of history. In 1990, when we started the company, we were very fortunate to get some large institutional clients within the first few weeks of founding the company. Some of you may recall First Interstate, which was the largest bank in Los Angeles. It was the 3rd largest bank nationally, and they no longer exist. We happened to start working with their executives that were being laid off, and we had about 4,000 people come through our programs in the first year from that one client alone. in watching all of these people come into the program, this is what they encounter. The Inspired Work program is focused on helping people through Socratic questions go into this deep self-inquiry of what they want their work to look like, what they've grown into as professionals, what they want their life to look like in terms of the marriage between their work and their personal life, what kind of meaning do they want to derive out of work. And what happens in the program is people typically in the first day design an aspiration or an ambition of something that they want to accomplish with their work and their lives, and very quickly encounter the obstacles that are in front of them. And in observing the people that were coming through our programs, about 3 to 4 years into it, we had a little over 10,000 graduates. We've got a little over 40,000 today. We saw patterns that were exactly the same in terms of people's fear about change, and in particular, the biggest fear of all, which is changing ourselves. We saw that the same patterns existed, whether the person was a business owner or an artist or a bank president or a doctor or a student coming out of school, that they ran into the same obstacles, and each one of these obstacles seemed to be more frightening than the one before it. So we started to observe ways that we sabotage even getting into a change process. A lot of that is what we're going to discuss today. All of us, we use these filters almost from the day that we're born and we grow up in this culture. We use filters to kill out the possibility of change. We're not going to discuss them in depth, but I want you to be aware of what the filters are to fit into this whole philosophy. We use cynicism. We find in organizational settings, all of you have probably encountered a great deal of cynicism when a company introduces a positive change process, or we go home to our families and we tell them that we're going to change what we're doing for a living. We find in organizations that when someone introduces a change process that is particularly frightening, we often use contempt, which is a distilled form of cynicism, and it's usually designed to kill off the idea on the spot. So somebody is usually pretty frightened about the whole idea of change when they use contempt to stop it. Some of them are more subtle. We find that aimlessness is a big deal in the American workplace. Over 80% of America's workers don't like what they do for a living. And the only way that we can have people clocking in and clocking out in the workplace in that state is to not have a clearly defined sense of mission, vision, and purpose. So aimlessness also tends to be a way that we kill off change. We're usually not even paying attention to it. The fourth one is resignation. We walk around with the idea, why even bother? I'm too old, I'm too young, I don't have enough money, I didn't get the big break at the critical time in the company, and we set it aside. And the one that's grown over the last 5 years or 20 years that's huge today is frenzy. Is people are finding in the workplace that they're working so fast, and the commute times to work have grown. The time that we spend at work has grown. The amount of tasks in our inboxes have grown to the point where we're too busy to think. And so we find that this is a bigger and bigger issue for people, just to get them to take the time out to stop and evaluate, what do I want to do with my life? So let's look at this architecture of what happens when we encounter change. So all of you have the paperwork and the chart in front of you. Is that correct?
Well, I muted everybody out. So we're going to hope that they're following along with the handout that you gave. And obviously, if not, you can
we assume that you have
best do it.
We assume that you have it. So let's talk about this from the least invested step to the final step, which is someone has committed to change, and they've succeeded with that transition. And between the moment that they make that choice to the end result, they've gone through 4 steps. and want to discuss those 4 steps. Again, if you feel something pressing in terms of asking me a question, please do so. And at the end of this,
at the end we'll open it up for questions, and I'll tell people how they can open up the line.
Yes.
I just didn't want it to be.
So let's start with the issue of choice, and I'm going to use, rather than portraying an array of different examples here, let's talk about career development. How many times have we asked somebody, Joe, what do you want to do with your life? And Joe responds obliquely, I don't know. And when we use those 3 magic words, I don't know, in our culture, we're off the hook. We observe this happening in the workplace every day. We certainly observe it in career development circles. At USC, one of the many initiatives that we're working on, we work with USC in employee engagement, but we're also working on career development initiatives because so many kids are coming into school these days investing $40,000 a year before they've taken the time to define what they want to do with their lives. That's crazy. But we'll ask a dozen of those kids, what do you want to do with your life? And half of them will say, I don't know. And they're spending $40,000 a year on education just because they're supposed to. So this is something that we see happens every day. And in our programs, in our leadership programs, in the Inspired Work programs, we engage in a truth process. So we suggest to people that the 3 words that are off the table is I don't know. That if we use those words, we've really excused ourselves from even pushing ourselves to define what we want. Many of us have been conditioned to do this because once we get on the road, we're facing a series of actions that really put us at risk. Arietti said that the world's mental institutions are filled with creative thinkers. And we find that creative thinking has very little to do with real creativity. Creativity implies that we have to take action. And the moment that we take action, we're putting ourselves at risk to a certain degree. So when someone says, I'm going to do this with my life, to themselves at the moment that they make a choice, or the business leader says, I'm going to create a revolution in our company, that's a private decision. But if we're going to take that first meaningful step towards success, we have to tell somebody. So the next step on the chart, you'll want to write into the left of it, declare it. You have to tell somebody. And who do we typically tell first? Some of you might say that we tell our spouse, our family, our coworkers, our boss. There's one common thread that fits all of these individuals, and these are members of our tribe. So we go home to our spouse and we say, you know what? I'm going to quit the 6-figure job I can do in a coma and start my own business. In fact, I think I'll do something that's altruistic in nature. And the spouse turns to the individual, and what does he or she say? They typically respond, you're crazy. Tribes, when we take them into any significant change of direction, typically come back with some form of you're crazy. We used to see this en masse in our programs. I was amused with one program. We had about 100 people in it, and about 50 of them were Jewish male professionals. It just happened by chance. They came back from the first lunch with the Jewish mother's hierarchy of acceptable career choices. And all of it was based on how one Jewish mother's eyebrows responded when the other said what her son did for a living. And a minor rise was CPA. Halfway up the forehead was attorney. to the hairline was doctor. And if one of those kids came to Thanksgiving and announced that he was becoming a florist, all hell broke loose. And that was actually one of the outcomes that happened with somebody. And what we find with tribes, I'm going to give you just one more example before I proceed to how to deal with it. But when we're dealing with tribes in a corporate setting, we've had many leadership programs that are based on producing ambitious profit results, ambitious changes in the culture. And very often when the executives return from these programs, they need to be really prepared for the reaction from the tribe, which is usually, again, some form of "you're crazy." So if we're going to create a revolution in the business and our resources have dried up, why are you trying to get us to work so hard? Those are some of the typical conversations. And the way that we deal with tribe, and we suggest to people that they deal with tribe, first on a personal level, we want to avoid getting righteous or pushy, because very often that'll happen if we get defensive about the decisions that we've made. I was very fortunate to go through the Xerox Sales Institute back in the early 80s, and the most valuable nugget of information I learned from that program came from psychologists. They studied the psychology of making a purchase, and they came up with this fact that human beings are hardwired to think about something other than themselves a maximum of 15 seconds. So when we go to our tribe and tell them that we're changing everything, being humans, they're going to quickly go to the question, how does this impact me? And in working with our tribes, we really want to come to them prepared to discuss what's in it for you. You know, if you allow me to do this, if you support me in doing this, here are the potential positive outcomes for all of us. In an organizational setting, we learned through our leadership development processes that the modern leader has a huge chasm to cross in terms of moving from this old-fashioned dictatorial way of leadership, of dictating performance to people, to being able to find out what their needs and expectations are and conspiring to give it to them. That's the basis now of the strongest employment contracts between a business leader and the direct reports. And yet we find in our work that most people feel paralyzed in how do you ask the questions that uncover and define that. So we work with people in really building a muscle in asking the kinds of questions and communicating with people that not only unleashes their needs and expectations, but also gives the leader the kind of truth that he or she can make the best decisions from. So, go
David,
ahead, Jeff.
If it's okay, just wanted to add it in because I know you're not going to pat yourself on the back, and I just want to take maybe a minute and a half just to say one of the ways I met David. Well, I met you, business-wise, but you had said, I mean, this is where I really got to know you, and I'm kind of jumping off what you said about how do we know the questions to ask and the questions that will create change. And so I met you, and you said, we both run different types of programs. Why don't you go through my program when you had brought it to New York where I'm based and you're on the West Coast? And I went through it, and, man, what has continued to connect me with you was how laser-focused the questions uncovered it. So it wasn't just me. We had other members of my team, my company, how it just uncovered what we needed to be doing on a personal level, obviously on a professional level, and even me as a leader, it created the space for them to say there were certain things I was doing at the time that showed, look, I'm just like everybody else, and I can get down and roll up my sleeves. And it created the space for them to say, we understand, we get that, but it's okay. You can not do some of those things and do some of these bigger things and let go a little bit more. And it was really great because it allowed us to open up a whole bunch of new opportunities. So I was just wanted to jump in and say it was an amazing experience. Later on, once you've given lots of value and takeaways today, I'll let you talk a little bit more about that. But the questions and people stopping and not taking that excuse of saying, well, I don't know, and coming up with answers was just very powerful. So,
Jess, I appreciate that. I want to keep everybody on topic here. And what our business is really about, asking the questions that people always needed to answer. And that is our focus in all of our curriculum and everything that we do here. But let's talk about, in mastering the tribe. For most people, dealing with the tribe, while it's a big issue, it's something that's, with a little bit of understanding, they can deal with it. So let's talk about how we progress individuals from that point of, they've told people this is what I'm up to, we're beginning to move forward, and let's move into the next event and the obstacle that's attached to it. The next event is to draw healthy attention to ourselves. So on that third line, you can write on the left-hand side, draw healthy attention to ourselves. And what's the obstacle? They will hurt me. Take a moment to look at how resistant so many of us are in making sales calls, in making presentations, in marketing our ideas and value to the company, in making interviews and having interviews for a new job, in going on television. This is the area that people are really scared, and there's a great deal of science behind why they're so scared. Let's look first at the issue of attention rather than just sales. In our country, the average American family communicates 7 minutes a day, and 4 of those minutes are spent arguing. This came out of the Television Research Institute, and that same family goes on to watch television an average of 4 hours a day. We spent many decades in this culture where we relied on the family, the home, to teach kids how to draw attention to themselves, how to give attention to others, and we've had huge breakdowns in developing that kind of skill. Unfortunately, we can't find any interventions in the educational system. A typical intervention would be that somewhere between kindergarten and graduate school, we're taught how to present ourselves, we're taught how to make a sales pitch, we're taught how to ask the questions that uncover people's needs and expectations. We're taught how to go into social networking, and it's a really long list of things that we can do to become more skilled in this area. But we force people through law school to get through the basic curriculum, and we never teach them how to market themselves, and we never require that they go into sales training. They join a law firm, and the one thing that's going to differentiate a good basic attorney from a partner is the ability to get business. And so many of the people at that point in their life are so frightened of getting out there and presenting themselves that it just doesn't happen. And an enormous amount of their potential, their well-being, their ability to have great success is set aside because we've never intervened with an important life skill that didn't get addressed at home or in school. I hope some of you resonate with this. We find in the workplace that there's so many people that are really doing a great job, but we don't know it. They're flying below the radar. They're afraid to be seen. They're afraid to have attention drawn to them. And the image that I try to put in front of people in how important this is I'll ask people, what would happen if your life depended on mountain climbing? Like at the top of this mountain was all the food in the world that you could eat, and you had to get there in order to live. The first time that you'd climb up that mountain, you'd probably be terrified. But by the 20th or 50th time, you would be pretty skilled and pretty able to get up there. One of my best friends returned from Mount Everest last year, and I've been a big, really involved in his conversation of becoming skilled enough to make it to the top of Everest and back here alive. And while there were risks and fears involved, I don't know anybody more competent than him in making it home. And this is part of what we need to be building into our workplace. We find in employee engagement that people that are hiding are not engaged. We find that people who, when we look at real employees, it's all about having that athletic chain throughout the organization that creates world-class involvement with the customer. You know, employee engagement, the business case, is to have fiercely loyal customers. And when we have people in an organization who are hiding, then we really lose a big aspect of how do we get them to to speak up and to share their point of view and to grow and to ask for help. So we find that this is a big issue, and I'm going to come back to you after the chart to talk about things that we can do within our organizations to build a more athletic workplace around getting, giving, attracting attention. And it isn't a one-way street. It's really the people who are healthy in this area not only attract positive attention to themselves, they give it to other people as well. And they're generous in their praise. They're gracious when they receive compliments. They don't turn people off to complimenting them in the future by saying, "Oh, you shouldn't have," or "it was nothing." This is one of the most important currencies in the workplace. And finally, in 1990, when I was developing the program, I came up with the first aspects of it very quickly. We had an extraordinary team of behavioral scientists that helped us put together the model. The question was, after we help people define a clear-cut vision for themselves, what's that one ingredient that's going to ensure that everybody at the table succeeds? And I believe at that point I was missing some of that in my own life, and ultimately realized that the most successful people in the world build effective support systems. And that's the fourth and final step before success, is that people who are very successful in making positive change are skilled at building effective support systems. The vast majority of people that we initially talk to about this come up with some form, it's the obstacle on the right, some form of that sounds good, what is it? So many of us have been rewarded over the years for what we do on our own, or we've been conditioned that there's something wrong with asking for help. And yet when we look at the Grammy Awards and the Emmy Awards, we find people being dragged off the stage because anyone who's become successful enough to make it to that podium is acutely aware of all the people that helped them get there. And they got there not because they got that help not because they're rich and famous. They became rich and famous because they built that support system. That's how it is for most people. And today, just some figures that continue to boggle my mind, and I keep finding that it's true. Kathy Sandine, who I worked with at UCLA, is now working for the Department of Education in Washington, D.C., and she's head of educational innovation. She has defined that the rate of change has increased so much that a kid coming out of college today is going to change his or her career 4 or 5 times. Not their job, but their career, because the rate of change of industries rising and falling is increasing so much that, we have to be able to anticipate change and start reinventing ourselves in order to meet the needs of the day. I know that virtually any one of you who is in a leadership role in your company would like to see during these changes that as many people survive those changes. And one of the ways that we can help people do that is really teach them some of these basics about getting through the fearful aspects of change. So with that, I'd really like to open the conversation to everyone in terms of making comments or asking questions.
The way people who want to ask questions can do it is you press *6 and you will unmute yourself, and then you'll be unmuted and you can say something, and then when you're done, you can press *6 and mute yourself again.
Great,
who would like to, at this point, ask a question, get a little extra focus or direction from David? Go ahead, press *6 and shoot. I know somebody's thinking about it. Let's see if we have shy people today, but I have a feeling that some...
Yes.
Hi, this is Wendy, and I just have to say I'm blown away at the brilliance of this presentation. I'm almost speechless, which is rare for me because it's easy to talk usually. And I'm most curious about your element that was draw healthy attention to ourselves, and the obstacle being they will harm me. And I absolutely resonate with this personally, and I work with coaching clients, and I see that that's true, and I'm wondering if you could speak to that a bit more, and if it's possible to speak to what one might do when you come up against that obstacle.
Well, I'll give you a personal example. Years ago, when The Truth About Work came out, my publisher and I made a decision to do a lot of work on radio. And my first radio appearance was with the Rick Dees Show, and I loved it. I had a wonderful time in the studio. I came back to my office and I was feeling kind of full of myself, and I saw on my phone that there were messages. And the first message was someone threatening my life because he didn't like what I said on the air. And my business manager was my next call, and I told him what happened. And he happens to work with a lot of public figures, and he said, at this point, we have to help you become harder to find. If you're going to go out into the world and really start telling the truth about work, it's going to frighten some people. And he was absolutely right that was a skill set I hadn't thought of.
Yes.
You see, when we start to draw attention to ourselves, first we have to examine what's our history with it. What kind of foundation do we have around what we've been taught, what we believe, how we feel about it. And for some people, they got so little attention, or it was so violent that they really have a violent reaction to just the thought of opening themselves up. And if they want to have a full and successful life, we don't want to push them to the point where they implode with the idea, but we want to encourage them not just to do solid therapeutic work, but to be building the skills that will give them the confidence to get out there more. So in an organizational setting, we really encourage organizations to show their people how to present themselves, give them learning programs about presentation skills and speaking, and big one today, social networking and making virtual presentations. That field is growing so quickly that many companies, I predict, by the time they even start paying attention to it, it'll be a train that's left the station. I'm a big advocate on getting people to go to Toastmasters and in a safe environment starting to chip away at that fear, but even more importantly, build a skill that replaces the fear. That seems to be the number one formula about helping people get through this, is you don't let them excuse themselves, or you try not to let them excuse themselves because of the fear, but you have to recognize that the best way to get them to move forward is to replace that fear with skills.
Thank you. And
Is that helpful?
Yeah, very. And that would be, so I heard that, build the skill analogous to doing the presentation work, teaching them classes in an organizational setting, and also your metaphor about climbing Mount Everest 50 times? Okay, so repetition and...
Repetition.
Okay.
I have a very senior executive who worked in his last job for 22 years. He's probably the single most talented guy in his profession, and he's looking for a new job. And one day he blurted out to me, "I hate making these phone calls." And I said, "I'm suggesting that you make those phone calls until you learn to love them."
Oh, that's great. Thank you. Thank you, David. That's really helpful. Yes.
Thanks, Wendy. And just press *6. And, David, before I let you get back to giving more and telling other things, I want to give other people a chance to chime in.
Absolutely. Welcome.
Yes, so press *6 if you want to unmute yourself and ask David a question.
Well, my name is Rita Sosa. I don't know if you
Rita.
can hear me. Hi.
Oh, it's good to hear your voice. Long time.
Yes, I've really enjoyed listening to you for the last few minutes. It's been, kind of put me back in that same frame of mind when I went through your program, back in 2004. And I transitioned then from being a vice president in human resources to going back to get my MBA, and now I'm a tenured faculty member in the business department in a local community college. I've been teaching for 7 years now. And what I wanted to say was, sometimes you're guiding you, and we, if we're going to follow your example, guiding people through this thought process, which is sometimes so deep that the answers don't come quickly. In other words, for my own experience, I wasn't exactly sure why I wanted to get my MBA, but I did it. I wasn't exactly sure why I wanted to teach, but I did it. And when I look back on it, it was all because of exploring these questions that, as you said in your talk earlier this afternoon, we just don't do. But over time, you will build this really nimble organization.
Yeah, Rita, much of what you're speaking to here is about when we find a truth. You know, people, when they hear the truth, on some level, they know that it is the truth. Mm-hmm. But if it runs counter to the way that they've been conditioned, the things that they've been conditioned to fear, the mind will commonly discard that, but it's still in there working away. And what you're speaking to is it really requires persistence with the teacher, the mentor, the business leader to chip away at this. When we do an employee engagement process for a company, it starts with this 2-day immersive, intensive experience, very much like what you encountered, and it creates immediate change in the workplace. But we found that we have to build a discipline into the environment for it to become a ritual, a way of life. You have to ritualize it. And we build these rituals in organizations that take 2 to 5 minutes. We find if it's more than 5 minutes, it's not going to be used. But that we have to be persistent. We have to be consistent with the message. we have to keep bringing them back to the value and benefits of their learning these skills. Thank you. I'm so glad you're with us today. We've got a few minutes for 2 or 3 other questions.
And actually, right before we take a couple other questions, and I know there are other things that you're going to talk about, it was kind of the perfect lead-in to where managers and the C-suite, where do they play into, or obviously they play into it, but it's a different situation. So you have people who need to create change within themselves, meaning, do I need to make a change in my life, or the organization is going to do something, how do I work with that? But as a manager, can you speak to that?
Absolutely. First, let's start with the managers are equally at risk about being contemptuous about change. I'm regularly struck at how many managers are preaching change, and then when it comes down to changing themselves, are absolutely cynical and contemptuous about the idea. Here's an example. Recently, I was at a client company, and we were the topic of social networking came up, and I discovered they didn't have a social networking process in their company, which in today's market is insane. And I brought it up, and there were 2 business leaders at the table, and both of them dismissed it without nary a look back. And my next meeting was with the head of social marketing for a big internet company, and he's a rock star in the profession. And I mentioned the conversation to him, and he laughed. And he pulled out 2 pictures. They were identical except for one big difference. The first one was of Pope Benedict's ordination 6 years ago. And behind this event were 300,000 people filling Vatican Square. And then the next photo was the same vantage point of Pope Francis' recent ordination with another 300,000 people out of the square, except this time there was this blinding light from over 100,000 smartphones flashing in unison. And he looked at me and he said, now so many people are contemptuous about this idea of how much the world has changed, but what they really ought to be asking is, how can I get my message onto those phones? So business leaders, it requires a certain self-humility and a certain, I think, healthy paranoia to look at, am I just casually dismissing change in my own life when bringing it on and actually exploiting it could radically improve my business and my life? That's something. Those are questions all of us need to be asking on a continual basis.
Fantastic. And anybody want to chime in here? Press *6 to unmute yourself. If anyone has a question before we jump back to our stuff, I want to make sure you get people.
Okay, well, I'm going to tell you what we're doing. In these conversations, my focal point is to cover as many thoughts on a particular topic so that you've heard enough to really take a deeper dive into it, and then give you information that can help you do that. So we've prepared 8 pages of information about this discussion today. And Jess, how did they get that?
We're going to email it to folks who are on the call today, or the people who have signed up. And if you didn't actually sign up and somehow you don't remember giving your name and your email address, it's kind of an important part for us to send it to you, then you need to follow the link or go down on the page that had the phone number emailed to you and sign in on the website, on the Inspired Works. You know what, David, just give your email address.
info@inspiredworkservices.com. Also, I'd like to share with you some upcoming events. On November 20th, we're going to have a teleconference where Jess is the speaker, and we're going to be talking about virtual presentations. This is a growing tidal wave of change in the American business landscape, where you're going to find companies very quickly moving from field sales calls to teleconferences and people connecting through this new medium. And Jess is a rock star in showing people how to be effective in making virtual presentations. So you'll be getting another announcement about that shortly. And then the third one is on December 11th, is called Under the Gun, The Search for Real Innovation. We have an exciting new colleague at Inspired Work. His name is Bill Donius. And Bill Donius was the CEO of one of the largest banks in the country, member of the Federal Reserve Board. And Bill started to study right brain thinking and how to access the right brain. And it not only changed his life, it changed his career. He wrote a best-selling book called Thought Revolution, which has been New York Times bestseller list for many months. And he's going to talk about how do you truly move into right brain thought. A lot of people are told, we want you to think out of the box. That's meaningless because unless you develop the skill to move into your right brain, you're thinking about moving into your right brain from your left brain. Might sound confusing, but he makes it very simple. We also have 2 events coming up with Inspired Work. On December 7th and 8th, we're having our final public program for Inspired Work at the Lux Summit Hotel in Bel Air, Los Angeles. It's a gorgeous location close to the airport, and we'll be having a number of business leaders join us for that weekend. And all of you are free to call me with any questions about how this could impact you personally, how it could impact your organization by bringing this to people. And then on November 12th, we are having our next version of a very popular new program, Inspired Social Networking. And this is in a technical program. We developed a communications program that helps you connect with people and actually build vital new relationships. And if you follow our guidelines, an entirely new community. So those are some of our upcoming events. I invite all of you to communicate with me. I'd love to hear how you felt about the program today, anything that I could do to improve it. And Jess, I want to thank you for being so kind and diligent every step of the way with this process.
Well, I appreciate that. I'm happy you were able to share today. I still have a few more things I want to ask you. And
sure.
Okay, I didn't know if
you got 8 minutes.
You're leaving all of a sudden. He was trying to keep it tight. David, I want to ask you about the phrase that always seems to come up when we're talking about sales or marketing or teams working together, and it's what's in it for me. Go out there and tell people the what's in it for them, and it's about the what's in it.
The what's in it for me is something that I feel is when we really recognize the way the human brain is designed. It's not only a practical question of finding out what's in it for everyone that we encounter. It's also a dignified question. And so we really want to ask people, why would you want to do this? We had a huge deployment of inspired leadership in the company right after 9/11. And the company had so much money that if there was a big problem, they can throw all of the resources at it and would go away. But now they had this big decline in the business, and their business is all about innovation. And so we needed to come up with a way to revolutionize the way people were working together. And as business leaders came back, we'd armed them with the kinds of questions that really got the stakeholders to express clearly why would they do it? Why would they step forward? Why would they do more? Why would they stay late? Why would they work together in skunkworks projects to come up with new products so that they could get the company back on top? And we found that it was really out of that kind of probing, exploring communication that the company really soared. And I was struck at the time that their biggest competitor was very autocratic. And so they came back and they were just telling people, work harder or, we'll find someone else to sit in that chair. And our client came to the front of the market in the next 2 years. And I really think that part of it was because of the new ways the executives were communicating and listening. You know, we operate at such a frenzied pace today that many of us are forgetting how to listen. Just walking through the airport the other day, I had to a couple of times jump out of people's way because they weren't looking where they're walking. I think all of us are encountering that kind of experience. For those of us who want to affect change, we really need to get people to stop and connect, and we need to take the time to listen to them.
So when you talk about some of those filters that you talked about that get in the way, cynicism and contempt, and you said there were 5 filters, right?
Yeah, we had 4 for a long time: cynicism, aimlessness, contempt, and resignation. But we've added frenzy to the equation because over the 20 years that's perhaps become the biggest obstacle. How many times a day do we say, I don't have time? I don't have time to look at this. I don't have time to talk. I don't have time to listen. I don't have time to pay attention to you.
Well, it leads us to something that is possibly a time management question, or maybe it's just a prioritizing question, which is
the consciousness question.
Yeah, well, so how do we say this is important enough to make time for it?
Well, a lot of people carry in their minds that it takes too much time, but we find that if somebody spends 5 to 10 minutes a day using the thought organizing skills that we give them, that they're going to get far more value and fulfillment out of the day. And we find that maybe 20 years ago we could have asked them to spend half an hour. Now we better get it done within 5 minutes or they won't listen to us at all. But just taking out 5 minutes to define what's important, and not just for them, but for myself, what I need to do to take care of myself today, what's the most important agenda that I promote today, who are the people in my circle that need my attention today. Just spending a little time looking at those issues can make every single day far more rewarding.
Great takeaway. Any last big one thing that people can run with and try today or tomorrow at work?
Well, I wrote a newsletter this past week that, and for any of you who are not on the newsletter, feel free to send me an email that you'd like to join. We send this out to about 7,000 people. And I wrote
send it to info at inspiredworkservices.com. Go ahead.
I wrote an article entitled Change for Good. And it describes how one of the greatest things that we can do if we want to change the world, go change someone's mind. And you can read the full article. If you send me a note, I'll send it back to you. But it's really one of the greatest ways that we can create change in this world is to change someone's mind. And I'm not talking about getting everybody to think like us. I think it's actually good that we have so much diversity in this country, and it's part of what makes us so powerful, and that we can learn some of our greatest lessons from someone really different from ourselves who offers us some kind of gift that changes our life. And so I'm just going to close this conversation with a few lines from a song from Wicked, written by Stephen Schwartz, which is one of my favorite songs ever written. And it's called Change for Good. And it opens with, like a comet pulled from orbit as it passes a sun, like a stream that meets a boulder halfway through the wood. Who can say if I've changed for the better? But because I knew you, I've been changed for good. So my suggestion to everybody is if you want to bring extra joy into your life this week, go change someone's mind.
That's
and
very
thank
nice.
you. Thank you to everybody.
Now, wait, David, and I know we kind of drew the official line, but I wanted just to ask you, now that we've done that,
the after program, the after.
Yes, it's like the after show.
Okay.
This means we can use profanity. No, I'm teasing. That's like some sort of cable show. Now, I want to ask you about the Inspired Work program, and now you have Inspired Social Networking, and obviously there's sales programs. I'm actually the person who runs the Inspired Presentation program, and when we do the next call, which is actually it's not really even a webinar. It's you'll see me. So it is a pure virtual presentation, and I'll be talking about the different types of presentations. But bringing it down, tell us what the experience is like with the Inspired Work program. Who are the main people who usually go to it?
Well, in our public program, people from all walks of life come to it, and they tend to be more of leaders and people who are really interested in getting the most out of their careers. Many of them have come to us through word of mouth, and so our audiences are quite diverse, and yet something quite magical happens in it is people bond at such a deep level that we have alumni groups that go all the way back to 1990. And what happens in the program is we create an absolutely safe environment for everyone to take a deep look at themselves and what they want out of life. And then we give them a narrative, a series of questions that gets them to really write out what they've grown into, what they want, what are the practical means of going from where they are today to where they want to be next. We help, the process very often helps people dissolve huge obstacles that they've lived with for so long, they just kind of take them for granted. And over the course of the 2 days, people walk out of the program with real clarity and focus of what they're going to want to accomplish in their lives. If you go to our website or my LinkedIn profile, you can get an extensive series of stories from our graduates of how this has impacted them. In organizational settings at USC has 46,000 employees and is focused on becoming the #1 university in the country. And for those of you outside of California, you might find that as being rather even arrogant, but they actually have the business plan and the money to do it. And we're delivering the Inspired Work program to large, intact teams, and we find that by having that conversation and that experience happen with everyone that we work with, produces a connectedness that's unlike anything we've ever seen before. And it's so powerful that we spend a great deal of time customizing the way that we get people into the program, how we manage it afterwards, so that they're getting as much value as possible. Yeah.
When you say there's 46,000 people working at this one organization and how you get people into the program, does that mean you get people to step up and say, I should probably be there?
Well, at USC we do it in two forms. We have open enrollment programs where leaders from all of their entities, schools, hospitals, sports teams can come into open enrollment programs and participate together. And then we have people who step forward and say, I want to take this particular school through the program, or I'd like to take the human resources group through the program. We find that by offering it in those two forms, it really works at such a large, sprawling kind of organization. Works rather well.
I just want you also to explain the Inspired Social Networking program is obviously newer, that you didn't have that in 1990 when your organization started. That's right.
It's brand new, and it's our most popular program, and I'll start with the rant. Most people, when they think of social networking, think of junk food, like junk mail arriving where I want to add you to my social network. We click yes, and we never hear from them again. Right. So many people have their connections filled with nothing. A lot of people are unaware that recruiters today routinely, hundreds of times in a week, discard candidates. They might have a good resume, but they'll go look at their social networking profiles and be completely turned off. Social networking is growing so quickly. The area that I find that people really seem to be at a loss is, how do you communicate? How do you reach out to people? What kind of messaging do you get them so that they are really interested in getting to know you? What's the information that you ought to use to define if you want to know them, and how do you express that? And we've come up with a very elegant process for reaching out to people and then building relationships in an appropriate way. What I mean by appropriate is that you're being so methodical in how you develop that relationship that you're developing a relationship that's strong. And candidly, that's how I found you. It's how I found Bill Donius.
Yes. It's funny as you were saying that. I mean, I remember we were friends, and I felt like
I came out of nowhere.
My colleague had introduced us to each other, but I didn't realize really until right now, and I'm being truthful as I'm saying that that's right. You had connected through social network, and just did it in the right way. And next thing you know, there's David Harder, and we're doing things and meeting and working together, and seamlessly. It wasn't any type of big.
It has to feel natural. It has to feel natural, and that is what this learning experience is about. It's quick, it's easy, it's 4 2-hour sessions. We do it virtually, and our clients, people are in love with this, and it makes it very clear how do you build relationships with people that can change your life and your business. Let's do this. Everybody, you're going to be getting the 8-page supporting document to this conversation. If any of you have questions about the information that we send to you, please feel free to reach out to me. And if any one of you want to discuss the work that we do, or you have questions about something going on in your life or your business, always feel free to reach out to me. I try to make myself as available as I can to people, and I thank you for joining us today. And I think with that, we're going to bid adieu.